Let's have a talk about RPG games for a moment. Obviously, they don't require an introduction. Everyone who is not completely new to gaming must have played at least one of them. So, if I asked an average gamer what is a definition of RPG game, he wouldn't have a problem answering that, right? Right? Well, if you think about this, the answer might not be as easy as you may initially think. Some of you may say, "Shut up, it is easy." RPG, role-playing game, it's a game where you play a role. What do you not understand? Are you stupid or something? That is probably what I would say if asked about it. But this is not true. According to this definition, almost all games, except for maybe casino games, card games, some puzzle games, would be classified as RPG. In Call of Duty, you play a role of a soldier. In City Skylines, you play a role of a mayor. In every RTS game, you play a role of a general or any other military commander. And in every racing game, you play a role of a racist. You get the point. Obviously, playing a character or group of characters is important part of every RPG game. But since this also applies to so many other genres in gaming, it's not something that makes RPG games unique. It is not something that really defines them. So maybe complex storylines with many branching off paths that we can take as a player, and complex dialogues that are not a simple cutscene but allow you many different choices that will affect the story. This is surely something that really defines the RPG genre, right? Well, those elements are also not unique to RPG games. After all, visual novels exist, and this is basically their entire gameplay. Also, not every RPG game has those elements. There are many sandbox RPGs like Valheim, Kenshi, Soulash, Conan Exiles, and many others, where you create your own story. Also, dialogues are not always complex. A good example here might be Fallout 4, where dialogues offer only an illusion of choice. Basically, all the dialogues in that game look like this. You can choose what, yes, yes sarcastic, and no, which is also yes but later. You can of course always argue that Fallout 4 is not a real RPG game, but that is perhaps a topic for another day. So if that is also not a core of RPG games, what else do we have? I know, what about character progression? Every RPG game has to have some kind of leveling system or other ways to improve the abilities of your character and the quality of the equipment that he is carrying, like better armors and weapons. And yes, in my opinion, this is very important element of a good RPG game. But is it really a core of what RPG game is? Those days, a lot of different games adopted these elements. Especially a lot of mobile games have some kind of leveling system. But also many normal games adopted those elements. For example, in many racing games, you can improve both your racist and your car by improving his skills and earning new licenses, and by tuning and finding new parts. In Call of Duty multiplayer, you also gain levels that unlock you new weapons, and inventory management plays a very important role in extraction shooters. So they do exist in many different types of games, but at least you can say that they originated from RPG games and they are commonly called RPG elements. So yes, I would also say that they are very important elements of a good RPG game. But there are popular RPG games without a real character progression. For example, Witcher 3. Where at the start of the game you are already famous and powerful character. professional monster slayer and a living legend. Technically, you gain new levels and find better gear, but does it really change the game? At level 1, you fight the same bandits as at level 30. The only difference is that now they have higher number above their head, more health, and they deal more damage. The same is true for drowners and other monsters. Sometimes they can get a different name and different color texture, and they are still essentially the same enemy throughout the entire game. And there are many other RPG games like this. They might not be a good RPG, but in my opinion they are still RPG. So what else is there? How do we define RPG games? I think I have an answer for that. First electronic RPG games were adaptations of tabletop RPGs, which started in early 70s with the first edition of Dungeons and Dragons. And even before that, there were these tabletop war games, which date back to 18th century and originally were used to train officers by simulating a battlefield. They moved pieces representing different units on the table representing the battlefield. And the outcome of combat was decided by combination of their stats and dice rolls, which represented unpredictable nature of the battlefield. Tabletop RPGs are basically the same concept, just reduce the unit sizes to just single characters. And all of those playable characters were played by just one person usually. They also added other non-combat related elements, like interacting with NPCs, buying gear, and so on. As TRPG games grew in popularity, many other systems were created, and many of them were not combat-oriented. Instead, they focused more on a social aspect, but all of them have one thing still in common. The result of your character's actions are decided by combining your character's stats with the dice roll. Technically, there were also experiments with diceless RPGs, but in my opinion, they are heresy. Abominations that should never see a light of day. They are the proof that every day we stray further from the God's light. They typically use a resource management instead of dice rolls. For example, action points, and if your character have enough of them, and his skills are good enough, he will always succeed his action. And that sounds incredibly boring. They are basically resource management games, not RPGs. True RPG needs to have some kind of RNG, which adds this element of chaos. After all, the most memorable moments in those games are where you are in very difficult situation and suddenly you roll a critical success. Or where you roll 1 and your entire plan needs to change because suddenly you alerted entire castle about your presence. Those are the moments that you remember the most. So how does it apply to computer RPG games? To some of them we can apply this definition without any changes. But I will use Morrowind as an example. In that game, the success of your actions is decided by the stats of your character and RNG. For example, you try to hit your opponent, you swing your sword and see the blade going through his model, but you still miss because your RNG was low or your stats were bad. And you stand there swinging at a rod for half an hour before you're able to finally hit it. The same is with other actions that you can take in that game, like opening locks. You just stand in front of the chest and pray for good RNG. Your skill as a player does not matter. All you need to do is make sure that you are in range and just click. The only other way to increase your chances of success is by using magic or drinking potions. Later games in the Elder Scrolls series changed those mechanics by introducing some skill-based elements. Now, hitting your opponent is purely based on player's action. If the blade physically hits him, it's always counted as a hit, but the amount of damage that this attack deals is based on your character's stats, weapon he's using, and RNG. Other actions in those games, like lockpicking, is done with skill-based minigames, and your character's skill and RNG can make your job as a player much easier or much more difficult. Also in Skyrim, success at persuasion is determined purely by character's skill and luck, just like in Morrowind. So in case of Oblivion and Skyrim, we need to add the third element, that is player's skill. So what is the definition of RPG game? In my opinion, it is a game where success or failure of your character's actions are decided by its stats, RNG, and optionally player's skill. And this is what I consider to be the core of RPG games. So basically you need a character or group of characters with stats that you can in some way modify, either by character creation or during the game by gaining new levels, perks or skills. But also you need some kind of RNG that corresponds to a dice rolls in tabletop RPGs. It adds certain level of randomness and makes the game more unpredictable. You cannot have an RPG game without those two elements. Instead, you end up with an action game, where player input should always have the same result. Do you agree or disagree with my opinion? Let me know in the comment section, and thanks for watching.